Hi, and welcome to the Vet Story Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about the business side of veterinary medicine. You know, the stuff they didn't teach you in school. We focus on what really moves the needle, from metrics, leadership, culture, and the decisions that makes running a practice easier. I'm your host, Jordan Morelli. I am a multi-practice site owner and the founder of Innovative Veterinary Management Solutions. My purpose is simple: to help practice owners move from the business operator category to the business owners category. And with that, let's get started. And we are back with another episode of the Vet Story Podcast. I'm joined with a repeating guest, Jordan Morelli. How you doing, buddy?
Very well, thanks. How are you? Nice to be back. Thanks for
I'm
having
well.
me.
No, anytime, buddy. Now, for those who don't know, Jordan is a lawyer, not the one that you need if you get accused of murder, but the one that you need for your team. Have I got that correctly?
That's right. I only practice happy law.
Happy law. That's what they say. Happy law. No divorce law, but happy law.
That's it.
Nice. For the listeners, Jordan, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks again for having me. As you mentioned, I'm a corporate lawyer located in Ontario, has offices in Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia. I am a corporate lawyer specializing in veterinarians and veterinary clinics. So I'm the general counsel for veterinarians. In any issue that comes up, they give me a call and I either handle it myself or we've got somebody internally that does it. As I said, I only practice happy law. So things like incorporating leases, employment, buy a practice, sell a practice, hire an associate or a locum, that sort of thing. But we do have litigators in-house if something were to come up, etc. So I'm the first point of contact. And if I can't solve it, we've got somebody in-house that can.
Every time I hear that line, if I can't solve it, I'm not too sure if you know this one, but every time I hear that line, I think of Vanilla Ice, and it's, you got a problem, I'll solve it.
I like it.
So, Jordan, as you work with clients, are you on a retainer basis or as needed? What does that look like?
Typically, we'll get engaged just on one point of contact or one discrete process. I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not looking to retire off any particular file. So again, typically it's like incorporation or an employment agreement, and then I'll follow the veterinarian through their practice life cycle. Perhaps they purchase or open a practice, we'll assist with that, and then eventually sell a practice, do some succession planning. We've got great estate lawyers and also tax lawyers. So everything's sort of quoted up front with a cost quote, and we proceed accordingly.
Yep. And I mean, do you practice all of Canada? Do you do what provinces don't you do? And do you do America?
Yeah, I don't practice in Quebec. We're not called there, and you'd be hard pressed to really find any lawyer outside of Quebec that practices there that isn't called there. So it's pretty usual. I can practice across Canada. And as I mentioned, we have offices in BC, Alberta, and Ontario, but can practice across Canada. I don't practice in the US, but we are closely connected with lawyers down there as well.
So for those who are listening, if you're in Canada, this is for you. If you're in America, Jordan has connections. So we can reach out to him. He can point you to the right direction. All right. So I have some questions. I have some questions that obviously I work with a lot of practice owners. There's many questions that I simply can't answer. And we can have a guess of employment law, but you are really the expert. So how do I say this? At any point, a practice is like, hey, is this legal? You're the go-to. Are you the go-to before a HR person or after a HR person?
Yeah, good question. And the answer really is the lawyer's two favorite words, and those are it depends. We'll typically be the first point of contact. A lot of clients I work with don't have in-house HR. It's just the practice manager, so we often step in. We'll guide the client depending on what the issue is. So if it's hiring an employee, just reach out to me. We'll draft the employment contract and go from there. If there's an employment issue, then we'll provide guidance. We wouldn't do the full investigation if required. We would sort of bring in an exterior service provider. Yeah, we're typically the first point of contact. As I said, call me and I'll put you in the right direction. If we don't do it, I know somebody that does.
All right. So let's pivot just a tad. Now, I'm a veterinarian, I'm approaching retirement age. I want to sell. I either want to sell through a legacy sale, or if I tick all the right boxes, I can sell to corporate. But I don't know this stuff. What do I do? This process could be overwhelming for some. What does that look like for you? And what's the first process? What does the process look like? What first step should I take?
Step one is to plan. Come up with a plan. And really, the plan is around who's your team. Stepping back even before that, are you ready to sell? What are you going to do in retirement? What is your plan for graduation, so to
Mm,
speak, taking the next step? But once you've settled on that, come up with a plan. And the first part of the plan is really to meet and hire the advisors. I always like to say you should be hiring your advisors on three separate qualities, and they have to interject with your own feelings on these issues, which are culture, fit, and partnership. What is the type of advisor that you're hiring? You'll need to look at an accountant, a broker, evaluator. I often add in commercial real estate agent, a corporate lawyer, of course, a financial advisor, estates lawyer, and a tax professional. Not necessarily in that order, but
yep.
you want a team and you want that team to have the similar values to yourself. So what is your practices culture? Does this team sort of fit with the culture? Can you have a long to medium term partnership? I mean, with your lawyer or broker, like you're going to be working together potentially for years on this, and we'll get into why a bit later. But you want to sort of assess your own values. And then the question is, what are your values, as I mentioned? So, ours internally are integrity, humility, and accountability. So you want to ensure that all those that you hire share similar values, and then you can work together cohesively as a team.
Okay, great. So, what is the difference between a legacy sale and a corporate sale?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a legacy sale, typically I would interpret that as sort of a sale to an associate. And that's typically how it would occur in the past and how it often occurred in the marketplace prior to, say, 2017, let's call it. And that was, again, senior vet would approach retirement age, look for a natural successor,
Yep.
and the associate would step in and sort of take the reins. Yeah, it's a very timeless transaction. And that's how sort of associates come into ownership. Around 2017, as I mentioned, we saw the introduction of more corporate sale. And really, that is private equity or a consolidator, for lack of a better term, of veterinary clinics that either started in Canada because they saw a fragmented market, or a US entrant or international entrant really come into Canada and start purchasing clinics and aggregating them. And the reason for that is really, again, a fragmented market, economies of scale, but it's a much different transaction. And honestly, the associate could be the hardest to manage in that transition, but it is a very systematic and it's a complex transaction where you're selling to a sophisticated party, and you require sophisticated advisors, especially for the latter.
Yep. So, I asked that question specifically because many practice owners feel that they want what they deserve in terms of a price. They feel that this is worth X amount of dollars. So we're emotional transactions now, where we say this is an emotional sale and we attach an emotional history of my baby, and this is what I feel my baby's worth. How do you get the client to separate the two?
Yeah, good question. It's often, as you mentioned, a very emotional transaction. I'm currently selling a group of practices now that I think the owner's been in there for 36 years. So, from inception, I mean, this is his whole life, right?
Yeah.
And this is his baby, and he wants to see it end up in the right hands. So that's the other part of the equation. Is it's not always about the sort of cash in your pocket. Sometimes it is purely about who is going to be taking this over, and will my legacy live on, the culture live on that I built, and that sort of thing. And that's why we talked about the earlier the three items that you ought to review: culture, fit, and partnership. And I'd add values to those. So often it's not about the money, but it's really about the legacy. But in this case, of course, with this particular sale, it is about the money. And this is the retirement fund. So I find I'm not having those difficult conversations too much anymore. I'd say around 2023, 2024, when the corporate consolidators really stopped, there was a real run up in values. Stepping back, just in case anybody's unaware,
Yeah.
especially in Canada, there's a real run up of values where multiples went from single digits to double digits to way out of the stratosphere. So and then it went off a cliff, and then we were back to single digits again, and the market stabilized, and it is where it should be. But you're
Mhm.
right, there were difficult conversations at that time because, your classmate or your friend may have sort of had a dump truck of cash pull up to his house, and all of a sudden it's a pickup truck full of cash pulling up to your house. And there's, people compare. I find a lot of vets still talk to their classmates, and, it's hard not to compare, especially when your retirement is focused on the exit and the amount of cash you're receiving. But I find I'm not having those conversations anymore because the market stabilized. It's stabilized
Mhm.
for a few years now. And the conversations really aren't about, why am I not getting the price of a few years ago? A lot of folks are aware of that. The conversations are now, again, back to what's the next step? What are you planning to do post closing? How are you, is this individual or this corporation going to continue on your legacy and that sort of thing? So I find it shifted, but of course, those were pretty difficult conversations when they were happening.
Yep.
But I think for somebody that does this a lot, it's actually a good thing, because if the multiples were where they were a few years ago, all of the corporate consolidators would exit, and it would actually shift the market and shrink the market, in fact, so that it would be more difficult to exit in the future. So now we have a more stable market for vendors, and I think it's actually a win-win for everybody. The former model was unsustainable. So it was sort of, luck, and those that got it. But now we have a much more sustainable market as well.
So, two questions arose from that conversation. One question is, what do you say? I'm not too sure if you actually have these conversations. Maybe it's the evaluators that have these conversations. But so what do you say to those practice owners that they're about to hit retirement age, they want to retire, they want to sell, they do an evaluation, and it turns out they're not worth anything. In fact, they are worth a asset sale and whatever's in the practice. And they look at that going, how? How is this worth $100,000, $200,000 because of asset sale? Why am I not looking at the 100 to $1 million or even 1.5, whatever that might look like? So why is it now no profit? Have you had that conversation before?
Yeah, I mean, like, as the trusted advisor, we're typically involved in those conversations. We may not be front of line, but we're sort of involved. And certainly this has come up on a plethora of transactions. And it's been a mainstay really during the corporate boom and after. And now it is much more difficult. There's no doubt about it. If you are a single vet practice in a rural part of Canada, it is more difficult to sell your practice now than it was 5 years ago, full stop. And what is the conversation? Yeah, I mean, again, a lawyer's two favorite words are "it depends." And it really depends on what are you looking for. So in your example, you're looking for sort of maximum purchase price. I would pair them up with a broker that really knows the market. And I would say, come up with a plan, either a broker or a consultant, or even myself, understanding what the corporates are looking for and come up with a plan. And in fact, we've done this successfully in the past with other practices. I'm not leading it because it's non-legal aspect, but I'm providing some background and advice
Mm.
and pairing them up with the right individuals. It would be, okay, let's find perhaps a student or students in this particular case where you can bring them in, get them trained up. In this case, it was sort of one vet billing several $1 million. And they would, are you flexible to look at bringing in additional individuals and transitioning your practice to them? Can you expand? Is there room to build additional exam rooms? Is there the ability to bring in a practice manager or work with an exterior consultant to achieve this? And really, it's again additional vets and the exam room expansion, which would assist with this process. That is like some individuals and some practice owners will take that on. And we've had that conversation. And now, a few years later, we're actually selling those practices and they're getting not only traction, but a much higher multiple than they would have seen a few years ago. But that's not everybody's game. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're sort of a one vet practice, then, again, in rural Ontario, just to pick on Ontario for a moment, dealing with one of those now and set them up with a broker. And they sort of said, well, this isn't really for us, but we do know other brokers that specialize in the tough stuff. And the tough stuff is, again, rural veterinary practice, single DVM. And it is, can we find a market for that? And where would the market be? Well, the market may be a corporate consolidator, in fact, even though most of the time the answer would be no. But you never know if the corporate consolidator has another clinic locally that they may be able to purchase yours and sort of fold that into the mix. So that may be an option. I wouldn't certainly write off the corporate consolidators, even though they are saying 3 or more vets on their purchases. Definitely worth exploring. Use a broker that specializes in smaller clinics. Perhaps he or she may know some associates in the area looking to purchase, et cetera, et cetera. So I typically set them up with a broker that specializes in that. Or in my own client base, I mean, dealing with hundreds of veterinarians across the country, you never know who's looking. I mean, again, we can have confidential conversations whereby the associate is not happy and is disclosing to me that they're looking. And all of a sudden, I put it together. Oh, there's a practice owner looking to sell. Talk to the associate, ask them if we're allowed to disclose, of course, and then go to the practice owner and we can make an introduction. So dealing with a professional that really focuses on veterinary practices can be helpful as well. So there's a number of things we can do, no magic solution. And honestly, sometimes it is the asset sale and it is a tough go. If you're able to make the changes or willing to make the changes or willing to work for the right people, there may be a different answer and other times there may not be.
Okay. So let's use some hypotheticals. We have a party that comes to the table, whether it be legacy, whether it be a corporate, and we say, yeah, hey, you know what? I'm interested in buying. What's the first thing that I, as a seller, should be looking for? Now, I know that there should be a letter of intent. Usually that comes from corporate, but we don't usually see it from a private sale. Talk to the audience a little bit about what a letter of intent means.
Yeah, again, another great question. And so a letter of intent, or sometimes a memorandum of understanding, is a non-binding letter. And it literally is a 1 or 2 pager that sets out the business terms in which the parties have had a meeting of the minds. So Reese, it's non-binding. Like, why would you use that is really the
Yeah.
question. And the answer is because it's a lot cheaper than going down the road of a purchase agreement and perhaps even, signing the purchase agreement and getting 3/4 of the way through the transaction and realizing that there is a major problem which can't be overcome. So the letter of intent is, I like to be as detailed as possible. Again, classic type A lawyer behavior, but I like to be as detailed as possible and list as many business terms in that letter of intent as possible. So what is the purchase price? What is the working capital? A lot of folks often don't think about that. What kind of sale is it? Is it asset or is it shares? Is the owner of the clinic staying on for employment? What are the restrictive covenants? So such as non-solicitation, non-compete. Set that all out, especially before the lawyers get involved on both sides, because as soon as the lawyers pick up the transaction, it's a lot harder to negotiate.
But
You
wouldn't
don't
you need a lawyer to review the LOI? So LOI, for those who don't know, is letter of intent.
Of course, I prefer getting involved, but what I mean by that is often the letter of intent is being discussed by the parties as opposed to the two lawyers sort of going back and forth as they would with a purchase agreement. So I find it's just early enough. I get involved in the background, but everybody's still bright eyed and bushy tailed. And again, you're sort of looking to agree on those seminal terms. Do you need one? Absolutely not. The parties may be absolutely aligned and can just move to directly to purchase agreement. In fact, that's what I used to recommend about a decade ago. But now, just knowing how expensive a purchase agreement can be, let's step back. Let's put the parties have spoken. Let's set out the key elements of that discussion in a letter, and let's close the transaction on that basis. Then typically the lawyers will get involved. They'll end up leading the transaction as opposed to vendor and purchaser, and they'll use that letter of intent as a guide to draft.
Okay, so how long does a letter of intent usually last?
If parties are sophisticated and they really understand all elements, what I mean by that is I find a lot of the letter of intent is education. For example, what is working capital? A lot of folks have never heard of that concept. They're not accountants, they're veterinarians and practice owners. Working capital is an accounting concept. Current assets minus current liabilities. In other words, how much cash or current assets, such as inventory, are you going to leave in the business on closing? And so a lot of this is education. Have you thought about that? Have vendor and purchaser discussed that? Do they even understand what it is? And then, once all those terms are set out, a letter of intent can be drafted very quickly. It can be really a matter of 24 to 48 hours. We can get something out, send it across. It's supposed to be simple, and it should be relatively inexpensive in comparison to the whole transaction as well. So that, again, if there's no meeting of the minds, then you just sort of move on. But a letter of intent can last, depending on the negotiation and depending on how long the parties take to draft. It can last, 60, 90 days until you get that purchase agreement signed. Really just depends how motivated the parties are.
Okay, so we've got through the LOI, the letter of intent stage. We're about to sign contracts to sell. I am now, as a practice owner, about to get a payday. What is the tax implications on that? I'm worried about the taxes. What strategies do you recommend? Again, I don't know these things. As an owner, I may not know these things.
The tax tail wags the dog in this case, pun intended. And, the letter of intent, you should be getting tax advice either from a tax lawyer or an accountant, even prior to the letter of intent stage or at the letter of intent stage. And the bottom line is, again, the tax tail wags the dog. It is going to be one of the most important aspects of this transaction. And you mentioned share transaction, or, we discussed that earlier. What is that? That means you sell the shares of the corporation being a living person. It continues to hold assets after closing as if nothing happened. And the transaction, if you think of a corporate diagram, really happens one level. One shareholder leaves, the other steps in his or her shoes. And why is that so important? Why are shares important? Why wouldn't you sell the assets, sell your equipment and your inventory individually? You want to sell shares because currently every individual in Canada, if the clinic's set up properly, if it meets certain tests, qualifies for a $1.25 million exemption whereby they can sell shares tax-free. And that's a big deal. And in some of these deals, it's the whole purchase price. In others, it is a very small amount. But again, 1.25 million is several $100,000 extra in your pocket. And again, if you invest that several $100,000 and compound it, 7 years later, you've doubled your money, or 10 years, depending on what your investment strategy is. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. Now, 1.25 per shareholder in their lifetime. Is that correct?
Correct. So I'll qualify that. It's called the lifetime capital gains exemption. And everyone has it in Canada. Your clinic has to be set up a certain way, and you have to plan for it at least 2 years in advance. So there's two tests that are too technical. We won't get into them, but those one of the two elements of the test means your clinic needs to be set up this way 2 years in advance. So this is actually something you should be thinking about well before the LOI. It is something, okay, I'm thinking about selling, I'm putting my team together. As I mentioned, one of those team members is a tax accountant or tax lawyer. Start thinking about this, restructure, get yourself set up, because again, $1.25 million is a lot of extra. The tax savings on that is several hundred extra thousands of dollars in your pocket. And this can get better. To answer your question, yes, it's per lifetime, but the government often, not every year, but often increases it with inflation. So if you've used it in the 90s, as some of my clients have, you actually probably have another $600,000-700,000 to utilize.
Yep.
So even though you may have used it, 20, 30 years ago, absolutely you should be looking at it again. And it gets even better because if you hire a really astute tax professional, then we can do some really cool stuff. And we can actually restructure and bring in additional individuals, utilize their lifetime capital gains exemption. So often it'll be a husband and wife. And we can even talk about children, depending on age and stage. And then all of a sudden you pool 1.25 times four for sort of a family of four. That's pretty powerful. That's $5 million or so of capital gains that all of a sudden are tax free. And the tax savings on that is over $1 million, well over $1 million. And then all of a sudden that's real money. And
Yep.
again, you invest it and you turn that into a pretty serious retirement fund if maintained and invested properly.
Yeah. I mean, we can dive into the weeds and talk about that could be a legacy style price versus a corporate style price. And sometimes, I'll just say it as it is, sometimes we sell to corporate because of that dollar value. But if you see a different kind of value somewhere else, this could be the one that just says, you know what, I'm happy with this price. I'm happy with this return. I'm going to get a tax exemption, so to speak, through this structure. I'm happy taking, we'll call it $500,000 less because I have this different tax structure. Maybe that is just what the conversation needs to be. Now, I hear a lot of, I'm going through the process of selling. When should I tell my team?
Yeah, very sensitive question. The answer is absolutely do not tell the team at the tax advisor stage, at the advisor stage, at the LOI stage, at the purchase agreement stage. Absolutely do not. The only team member you're going to bring into this will be your practice manager because of the amount of heavy lifting you'll have to do through a process that's called due diligence, which basically means you hand over all of the relevant documents with respect to your practice. You certainly want an extra pair of hands for that process because it is a lot of heavy lifting. So you'll want to bring in a practice manager or an extra pair of hands. But in terms of the greater team, you're going to either if you're selling to corporate, there will be a whole strategy in which the corporation to which you're selling to will manage it. But you should be telling your team when the transaction is going to close within a few weeks. And the answer depends on what is the size of your team? What is the makeup of your team? If you have several or even one associate DVM, I suspect that the transaction is going to be conditional on that veterinarian signing an employment agreement with the purchaser. So you would have to sort of bring them in earlier, maybe a month out, start having that discussion. But absolutely, the purchase agreement should be signed and you should be well on your way to and very comfortable with closing the transaction. The conditions should have dropped. Often there's a financing condition or a lease assignment or a change of control condition on your lease if you have a lease. The condition should be dropped. The transaction should be final, and then you announce it to the team. Again, if you're selling to a corporation, they'll have a whole other team to roll your practice into the corporation. So there's often a lot less thinking about it. If you're selling to another associate, then often more of the practice is aware of it at that stage. If you're selling to a third party associate, it should be probably a month, 3 weeks out prior to closing.
There's a lot of conversation around when should I tell them, and if I tell them, they'll leave, or whatever that may look like. Depends on what that contract of sale looks like. What does the market look like now, and what do you see the future looking like? in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, the market's certainly a lot different than it was, as I said, 5 years ago. It's stabilized quite a bit, which is a good thing, in my opinion. There are a lot of owner to associate or legacy transactions that are occurring again. And I love that because I act for independent veterinarians. So it gives me great joy to sort of see that model come back and resurface because largely in sort of 2020 to 2023, there weren't that many. So there's a lot more owner to associate transactions. I am seeing the multiples stabilize in the corporate roll up market. And it sort of depends on the size of your practice. It can be anywhere from
Mm.
sort of 6 to, let's call it 11. Depends where you are, the size of your practice, et cetera. But I'm also seeing corporations that took a pause after 2023 re enter the marketplace. They focused on operations from 2023 to current day. And they're ready to start making acquisitions again. So I'm actually seeing some corporate come back in, start making acquisitions, but their key acquisitions, strategic, the get to know you period goes from in 2021 again it was like a month or two. Now it's 6 to 8 months, and all of a sudden then they start sort of making advances, make the offer, and close the acquisition. So the marketplace has stabilized quite a bit, and we're also seeing a lot more due diligence being done on these practices. So again, you got to have your practice manager geared up for this because it is a lot of heavy lifting.
I've heard a lot of stories that we've gotten to the dying hour and the deal's been pulled for any and other reasons that they can come up with just because of something that they didn't like or change of heart or something like that. They don't really need to give you a reason. It's like, nope, we're pulling out, but there's nothing else. There's nothing really to compensate that heavy lifting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, that was happening quite a bit more again around 2023 when prices were through the roof. As I mentioned, prices were through the roof. It was an unsustainable marketplace. Corporate was looking at it and saying, what are we doing? And then they just backed out. And we saw two major consolidators stop and back out.
Mm-hmm.
That too good to be true fairy tale, they did step back and recognize, in fact, it was too good to be true. It was heartbreaking because the practice owners did suffer in certain instances because they would be 9/10 of the way to the finish line and have a bunch of legal fees. And then these folks pulled out.
Yeah.
But that said, the market has stabilized. There's certainly a lot less of that these days. And I'm not aware of this having happened in the last couple of years. That said, it still can. Again, if you've got a high quality asset, you've got a couple of years in the making where maybe you can make it even a higher quality asset by speaking to a consultant, a broker, or even a lawyer or an accountant that commonly deals in this market and really elevate your practice, then all of a sudden you've got an extremely high quality asset which you can sell, and then you'll mitigate those issues. As the paid pessimist, we're always thinking about that, but of course we'll get the purchase agreement signed up and then it's a binding transaction which they have to close.
All right. Jordan, that was a wealth of information right there in the 45 minutes we've been speaking. Do you have any final thoughts, as Jerry Springer would say, before we leave?
Again, hire the right team. Like that's really what it comes down to, is have the right advisors in your pocket. Just make sure you're not using your sort of brother-in-law who's sort of a good accountant but has never dealt with a veterinary practice, or your residential real estate lawyer who's a great lawyer but has never dealt with a vet practice. These are sophisticated transactions, and this could be the largest transaction of your lifetime. And the right team is really key. The advisors that commonly work in this space can add an incredible amount of value and can really smooth out and know where to sort of push and how to deal with any unforeseen issues. So it's really about the team, but it's also about the culture of the team and the values and that sort of thing. Make sure they fit with you, and this is going to be a relationship that carries on well past closing. And why is that? Is because there's items after closing, such as a true up, or maybe there's an earnout, which is a bonus that one can accrue post closing after hitting certain targets. And so this could go on for years. So again, hire the right team. It's key. And the second piece of advice is get really good tax advice 2 years or more prior to selling.
Yeah,
That can really put a material amount of cash in your jeans.
love that. Jordan, we're going to put your information in the show notes so everyone can click on that and reach out to you. But let's just pretend someone's driving. Where can they find you? What's the website?
Perfect. It's linmac, linmac.com. Again, my name is Jordan Morelli. We run veterinary law, and my email and phone number are both on the website, and that is my mobile number, so it goes direct to me.
Well, you're brave putting your mobile number up there.
Well, that's it. The best part about this, Reese, is that veterinarians are great people, and I love hearing from them. So please feel free to give me a call.
Nice. Thank you so much, Jordan. Really appreciate your time today. I hope everyone got a wealth of information out of that one. But I mean, I did. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you. And thanks for joining me on the Vet Story Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. If you want to come on the show to share your story or knowledge, email me, Reese, RHYS, at ivmsolutions.org. This podcast is brought to you by IVMS, Innovative Veterinary Management Solutions. If you're a private practice owner or manager and find that the wheels are spinning with little to no direction or profits, or even if your culture is struggling, give me a shout. This is exactly what I help practices fix. I even offer the only money-back guarantee that exists in our industry today. Practice ownership should not be this hard. Visit ivmsolutions.org to learn more. Until next time, take care.